This happened between the ages of 13 and 16. I'm now 26, but I still remember it vividly. When I was in the 8th grade, my friend Jenny and I were messing around during PE, and our teacher was getting irritated that we weren't paying attention or doing what we were supposed to be doing, so he separated us. Before we parted ways, I handed her my phone and told her to give me her number. She quickly put it in, and I put my phone back in my sweat pockets and went to the other side of the gym. I texted her, "Hey, it's me," and a picture of me making a face, and she replied a couple of minutes later. We were talking back and forth for a couple of minutes before I said something I thought was hilarious. I looked up to watch her read my text and burst out laughing. That was when I got a response without Jenny ever looking at her phone. Who was I texting? I messaged the number again asking who I was talking to, but I didn't get a response. After class ended, I walked up to Jenny and asked her what her number was. She told me her number, and the number I had in my phone was off by 1 digit. The person never texted me back, so ultimately I just forgot about it. A couple of days later, I was standing outside of school talking to my friends when I got a text from the number. "You look good in blue," it said. "Who is this?" I asked. "Jenny," they responded. It wasn't Jenny. I looked around, but amongst all the cars and kids, I couldn't even begin to imagine where this person was texting me from. I was wearing a blue shirt that day, but I didn't really get creeped out by it, because being a 13-year-old teenager, I didn't really realize the severity of how weird it was. So for the next couple of years, I would randomly get text messages from this person, who I found out was a man, telling me he loved me and telling me he was going to make me his one day. I never told my mum about it because, again, I didn't realize the severity of it. That was until something happened when I turned 16. One day after school, my sophomore year, I was sitting on my couch watching TV when my phone chimed. It was a picture message from a number I didn't have saved in my phone. I opened it, and it was a picture of a male's private area. I yelled, "Ew!" and threw my phone. A couple of seconds later, my phone chimed again. I picked it up, and it was a picture of a big Hispanic man, and it was coming from the same number. I showed my mum's boyfriend at the time, and he called my mum to come home. When my mum got home, I showed her the pictures and told her everything. Of course, she was angry at me for not telling her years ago, when it had all started, but I just apologized, and she told me it wasn't my fault, and we were going to the police. So we got to the police station and filed a police report, and the officer, who shall remain unnamed, in short, did nothing. He ran the number and told us that the number was from a town over, so was technically out of their jurisdiction. So my mum asked if we should go to the town over and file a report there. He said no, and that he would call him. This is how the conversation went between the officer and the man. "Hello, this is Officer Davis from the town police department. Have you been sending pictures to a young girl?" "No habla inglés." "Oh, okay, sorry." And that was it. That was the whole confrontation. My mum was livid. She lost her mind at this officer. I don't even remember most of what she'd said, except for that it was very loud. There was lots of cussing, and the officer was scared. He looked at my mum and told her, "Look, he hasn't ever showed up in person, and he doesn't live in town. My suggestion is to just block his number." My mum, dissatisfied with this answer, grabbed me and we left. We were going to the next town over's police department. Yes, he was right. I hadn't ever seen him in person, but he had seen me in person. He knew things like where I was and what I was wearing, and he had been texting me for years. On the way to the police department, he called. My mum pulled over and grabbed my phone. "Hello? Where is Lisa?" "This is her mother, you sick fuck." He started laughing and then told her, "She is mine. I'm going to take her away from you and make her my wife. You can't stop me." My mum started screaming. "I will fucking kill you, you coward." The whole time he just laughed at her while my mum yelled, and I started crying. After he hung up, my mum called the police again, and they told us there was nothing they could do, and to just block him. Luckily, that was the last time I had ever heard from him. This was 10 years ago, and I still think about it all the time. I have a daughter now, and I worry about things like this happening to her. or that that man will come back one day and target her or something. I'm sorry my story didn't have some crazy climatic ending, but it's still something that makes me nervous, even to this day. I have never seen him in person, but the fact that he has seen me and knew where I went to school, who knows if he's still out there, or if he really did give up. All I know is, I hope I never meet him. This is a story that's hard to share, but also it's something I desperately need to get off my chest. It's a story about learning the true meaning of naivety and deception, a story of destruction and of rebirth. It all started about 3 or 4 years ago. I had been working at my first job for about 2 years, and that was the time I would meet the 2 men that changed my life forever. One for the better and one for the much worse. The restaurant I worked at had been bought out by a big company, so there was a big overhaul in staff and everything else. A whole new set of managers and some new waiting staff as well. One of these men would become my boyfriend 3 years later, and we're still very much in love now. The other man, we'll just call him POS, because I can't even think of his name without getting upset. He started as a manager around that time, and I never really took much notice of him. He was nice enough and seemed funny. After I'd worked there for a while, I was getting closer as a friend to my current boyfriend, and I then left that job for a good 6 months before returning to it. At this point, most of the staff had changed because of a high turnover. I only knew about 3 of the workers, one of which was POS. Fast forward to about 1 year later, where him and I are okay friends, and I'm well into dating my boyfriend. POS would start complimenting me and love-bombing me. He would constantly try to find my weak spots and try to make them better. He would always buy me things and get me to work more hours with him. I learned many things about him during this time, and I started to notice how unstable he was. Then the dots started to connect, and I can remember how many fights he'd gotten into that were supposedly in self-defense or for the restaurant. I started thinking about his weapon collection and how off his voice was when he had said to me, "I had you picked out from the moment I met you." During my biggest moments of weakness, when I would feel ugly and vulnerable, he would make me feel pretty and special. Then the time came when I would make what I believe is the biggest mistake of my entire life. I sent him pictures that could destroy my relationship. I was naive in believing all the ways he related to me. He was just a great liar and manipulator. He even joked to me about his masks and his 9 other personalities. I want to go back and slap myself for not putting it all together faster. The crazed look he got in his eyes sometimes, his breakdowns, so much of it were red flags that I just didn't see. He knew how to manipulate me and the people around me. None of it even hit until about a week after I quit that place. Then one night out of the blue he started messaging me, and things escalated because the last time I saw him I told him there would never be anything between us. He started ranting about justice and how he could see through me and my lies. He said I needed to tell my boyfriend about us or he would. I told him that there wasn't an us and that it wasn't any of his business. He kept insisting that he loved me and that we needed to be together. He wouldn't take no for an answer, even though he kept asking and asking for me to tell him it was over. So I'd tell him it was, but he couldn't take it. He kept calling me a crazy bitch and trying to gaslight me. I'm thankful that I was strong enough to not give in to him and to completely cut him off from my life. But it got worse. Calling himself Jack the Ripper, saying he was going to find me and find my boyfriend. One night I was in my bedroom in a complete panic, crying and throwing up, all the while trying to deal with this whole situation. I asked him what he wanted, and all he said back was, "You." I've never felt that kind of fear before. I started thinking about how much I love my boyfriend, my amazing, perfect boyfriend, who has been with me through everything, and I calmed down. That's when I marched into my boyfriend's room, sat him down and told him everything. We talked it all through, and he forgave me. It hurt, and I still haven't completely forgiven myself for hurting him in that way, but I'm hoping one day I will. I messaged POS and told him I'd already told my boyfriend and that he didn't have any more power over me. He started grasping at straws, threatening my other jobs, where I work with children. He even threatened my PlayStation account. He's genius. He's insane. I called him by his name while he was talking through his other personalities, and he told me to call him Jack, or there would be consequences. I blocked him on everything. I deleted my Facebook. I disconnected myself from everyone who worked with him, and I spent an entire day speaking to police and the principal at the school where I work. While talking to the police, they told me that soon he'll find someone new to target, so I could rest easy. But that didn't make me feel better. I still felt sick because even if he's not fixated on me, that doesn't mean some other poor girl deserves him to do it to her. That experience with the police changed me. What do you do when someone says you have to be with them or he'll kill you and the person you love? I didn't know then, and I still don't now. I still have nightmares about it. That Friday, while I was driving home from work, I got pulled over because an anonymous person called in describing my car and license plate, saying I was drunk and on drugs. I wonder who that was. I calmly explained to the officer that I was coming home from work and gave him my case number. I got about 8 calls a day from different random numbers for about 3 days after. A few months later, after a lot of therapy and work, I see him twice in one day. I know his car, so I pretty much get anxious whenever I see the colour or make of that car anywhere. One day my worst fear happened. I was just on my way to a doctor's appointment, and I came to some traffic lights. I pulled up to a car that was way too familiar to me, and I noticed that there was no way for me to escape. He knows my car. My windows aren't well tinted, and I can see the shadow of his hair move. I know it's him, and my stomach rolls. I pull out my phone and call my mum. I was shaking so badly that I had to redial twice. I ended up making 5 different attempts to get to the doctor, and I tried to park in a very hidden place. I was very proud of how calm I was when I walked in for my appointment. It was really hard. After my appointment, I met with my best friend, and we went to walk her adorable dog near where she lived. This guy could know where we were, because my car was right outside her house, and I could see familiar movement from the corner of my eye. I seriously went cold. I could see him walking and starting to cross the street to where we were. I didn't say anything. I just dragged the dog around the corner and kept going until I felt safe. When I explained to my friend what had happened, she helped me calm down, and honestly, I'm just very thankful she was there. I am now writing this 7 months later. I'm still undergoing therapy from this whole situation, but I have started to do something very important. I've been reclaiming my space and my mind. I have slowly started to reach out to old co-workers from the restaurant, and I even went outside of the restaurant to say hi to managers and servers I used to know. I found out the next day, though, through my good friend that works there, that POS said he was uncomfortable with me being there. I laughed. I genuinely laughed really hard. And then I went back for the next 3 days to pick my friend up from there, just to make a point. I haven't been strong enough to go inside yet, though. So many of my nightmares are associated in that place. I can smell it. I can hear the glasses clinking, and it makes me shiver. There's a certain shade of blue he wears, and if I see it, it makes me shake. In every dream I have that colour lurking in the background, and his presence is always felt. There is a big festival that includes that restaurant every year. It's so much fun, and this will be the first year that I can go in 4 years, because I've always worked it. My friend invited me to go, but I was hesitant at first, because this is somewhere I knew he would be. But I went anyway, and sure enough, when we passed the restaurant, he was wearing that blue shirt. Instead of seeing him from the corner of my eye, like I had in my dream, I looked straight at him. I got so angry, anxious, and I was just insanely pissed off. I just kept walking and forced myself out of the funk. I will be posting updates if anything else happens. Thank you so much for sharing this journey with me. Writing this right now is calming me down. I live in a huge and beautiful house, but there's one problem. I'm often home alone, and our house has giant windows. I'm a 23-year-old girl that's going to college nearby, and I live at home in order to afford school. My mum and stepdad have much more of a fun nightlife than I do, so they often go out of town. We live on a lake in a nice private lake neighbourhood that's supposed to be monitored, but it often isn't, due to lazy patrolmen. I have no self-defense skills and I'm really small. In a neighbouring town we have another house, and I used to live in it. We had bought it so that I could live close to my college, as it is only 3 streets away from it. Whilst living there I had a girl that was stalking me. She would leave gifts, footprints by my window, and letters. I knew who she was. She had been a classmate at my college that was just not going to accept that I had no interest in dating girls. I filed a police report, and we had been notified a few times because she had been seen entering our backyard, even though we hadn't been back to that house in a while. I definitely know that gut feeling when I'm being watched. I'm back at our main house due to that experience and have been here for a few months now. It's 40 minutes away from our other house, and it's extremely difficult to find. We live on a road impossible to find on GPS, and only my closest friends have been out here to visit. 2 weeks ago I had to call the cops. I had been home alone sitting upstairs, and I saw a figure in our yard, and then I could hear doorknobs being rattled downstairs shortly after. After the cops showed up 45 minutes later, as they'd gotten lost, they found no one and assumed it was someone attempting to break in. Whoever it was definitely saw me because our windows are huge and located everywhere, and I was sitting right beside 3 windows that are 15 by 13 foot. This house was custom built for my mum and stepdad, so we have giant windows everywhere, including all of the bedrooms. Some of our windows are so big because they previously had belonged to an old church, at 17 feet high. Even my room has 4 large windows that luckily fit the blinds, but most of our windows are too large for blinds or curtains. Basically, everyone can see into our house, whether they are in our front yard, backyard, or in their boat, etc. It doesn't matter where you are, you can definitely see into a big portion of the house, and the house itself is huge. There are 8 doors that I constantly check to make sure they are locked. I have 2 dogs, one of them being an English bulldog, and a week ago I got home and found a framed art print of a bulldog with saran wrap wrapped around it. There was no note and no context to it, so we have no idea who left it. I'm an artist and I often share pictures of my bulldog, so I felt it was aimed at me. We asked all of our friends, family, and even our neighbours, but nobody knows who left it. Tonight I finished some assignments and immediately laid down in bed. After about 20 minutes, I heard knocking on my window. My dog was in the hallway and immediately started barking as soon as it happened. After laying down for 10 minutes more, frozen in fear, I got up to go and see if there was something or someone out there, lurking in the dark. And there wasn't, from what I could tell. This all happened tonight, and I'm still laying here scared out of my wits. The cops take so long to get out here, and will probably get lost again. My anxiety is so high, probably because of my past experiences. I've called my older brother and messaged friends to let them know what's going on. All 8 doors are locked, and I triple-checked them. I honestly don't know why I wrote this out. It feels silly writing it, but the feeling of being watched is so scary right now. It all started in high school. I was a naive, shy and awkward 14-year-old when I asked this one guy to our school's Sadie Hawkins dance. I knew him through a mutual friend of ours, but we didn't really talk. All I knew was that we both liked anime and manga, and that he was kind of quiet most of the time. So I wanted to be nice and I asked him out to the dance. That was mistake number 1. That started the years of torment. He said yes, and we agreed that we would just meet at the dance with the rest of our friends. A few hours later I got a long message from him on Facebook, confessing he'd always had a crush on me, that I was beautiful, and that he couldn't compare my beauty to anything else because he considered that an insult to how beautiful I was. It was pretty cringy, but at the end of the message he asked if I would be his girlfriend. I was uncomfortable after reading the entire thing, but again, being the shy and awkward 14-year-old that I was, I accepted. Mistake number 2. He was ecstatic. He asked if he could call me that night, so then asked for my phone number, and I gave it to him. Mistake number 3. He called me later that night, and I learned a lot of things about this guy that I did not want to know. One of the major things was that he was a massive crybaby. I'm not trying to say that men that cry are weak, but this guy would cry at everything and would always play the victim. Felt like all his friends didn't like him. He'd cry. No girl other than me would love him. He'd cry. Teacher failed all of his assignments even though he openly admitted he didn't want to do any of the work. He'd cry. The list goes on, but I'll get to more of it later. I also learned that night that he had a foot fetish, and now that I was his girlfriend, he was going to do so many things to my feet. Again, not trying to shame anyone, but as a 14-year-old who didn't like showing off any part of my body, I was uncomfortable with this, and when I went silent for a little bit, guess what he did? He cried, because I supposedly thought he was a freak. His words, not mine. I told him that no, I didn't think he was a freak, although I was starting to. He instantly cheered up. He continued to call me every night, and the conversations usually were the same as the first night he called, until the night of the dance. At the dance he mentioned he'd never had his first kiss, and how sad it was. I'd already had my first kiss at this point, and I'm so glad he wasn't it. I kissed him at the dance just to get it over with. However, throughout the night he would try to kiss me even more, and even tried shoving his tongue in my mouth. It got so bad that a teacher had to pull us apart, and of course he goes off to sulk and cry. After the dance I got a text from him saying how magical I made the night for him, and that the kiss was delicious, not exaggerating, and how the stupid teacher didn't understand our love, again, not exaggerating. I was feeling pretty sick to my stomach at this point, and wanted to break up with this guy, but I stayed with him a little bit longer. Mistake number 4. 2 days later he asked me out on a date to the movies. Stupidly I said yes, and he asked if one of his best friends could come, and if I could bring one of my best friends, since his friend found her attractive and wanted her to be his girlfriend. I told both of them no because he wasn't her type, and in all honesty she hated him. They kept pushing me to bring her, but I kept telling them no. Then his best friend called me a killjoy cunt, and he did his usual thing of crying because he didn't get what he wanted. We went to see the Lorax that night, and his friend sat behind us. The second the lights went out, he turned my head and started kissing me and pushing his tongue into my mouth. I tried to push him away because I was not going to let him do this to me the entire movie. Again, his friend is right behind us, and he keeps trying to kiss me. The movie ended, and when I got home, he'd sent me a text saying he was depressed, and a picture of my feet would make him feel better. I told him no, and he threatened to kill himself, and it would be all my fault because I didn't send him a photo. Horrified at how fast he snapped, I sent him a photo. The next night he asked if I had been naughty lately. Knowing where this was leading to, I told him no. He then starts crying about how he thought I was cheating on him, and that I had been being naughty with other people, and again threatened to kill himself. I tried to calm him down by telling him that I was a virgin and was not a sexually active person at all. He suddenly, as if on a dime, stops his fit and asks me if we could just completely forget about what just happened. I tried telling him that what he did was incredibly inappropriate and was about to tell him to leave me alone, but he pulled the victim card again and started crying. During the crying, he asked for another picture of my feet to calm him down. Scared he was going to snap again, I sent him another picture. This continued for a few more days until he would try and message me whenever I was busy, at school, babysitting, volunteer work, etc., etc. He'd accuse me of cheating and demand I tell him what was going on. Then he would say sorry and play the victim, asking for pictures of my feet to calm him down. I'd eventually had enough of this, and after 2 weeks of dating him, I broke off the relationship. He cried, of course, and begged that we at least stay friends. The school year was ending, and he said he was transferring to a new school, so I figured I would never see him again. Wrong. At the beginning of the school year, he would message me, and when I didn't respond, he would cry and threaten to kill himself. After a while, I just started to ignore the message, and threatened to call the police if he didn't stop. You'd have thought he would have stopped after that, right? Wrong. Every year, up until I turned 21, He would message me random things at random times. Here's some examples. Hey, my friend. We're friends, right? Can you send me a pic of your feet? I miss you. I'll leave you alone if you want me to. I'm pathetic, aren't I? Plus much, much more. And each time I ignored him and finally blocked him on every platform he'd tried to contact me on. Fast forward to when I'm 21. I'm in college a ways away from my hometown, and from him, and I have a boyfriend. I get a notification from Instagram saying he started following my profile. I quickly block him, and not even 5 minutes later, I get a message from Facebook from a random profile I don't know. The message read, "Why did you block me on Instagram?" I lost it. I sent him a long message telling him that if he contacted me in any way, shape or form, I would get a restraining order, and told him how damaging that would be to his reputation and his future career. Again he played the victim and told me that he couldn't believe he'd fallen for a liberal bitch like me, and to never contact him again. I never heard from him again, and good riddance. My friends always tell me I have an unusual knack for attracting weirdos, and this is always the first story that gets brought up when we talk about it. So I thought I'd share my experience about this guy from when I was back in secondary school. I'm in my final year of university now, and this guy still sometimes haunts me. When I was in secondary school, around 6 years ago now, I was friends with a group that constantly added more and more people into it. It was a good way to get to know more people from other schools, and generally, these people were quite nice and never invited creeps. One day a new guy started to turn up and hang out with our group. For the sake of the story, I'll call him John. John was 2 years older than me, and when I first met him I thought he was a little weird, but everyone in our group got on with him. He was good friends with someone who went to my school, so I didn't think too much of it, and just tried to get to know him. He told me whereabouts he lived, what he was studying at college, and a little bit about his family and interests. I probed him a little further, and this is where things began to get a bit strange. Bearing in mind that I had just met him that day, he began to get all excited and told me how his father was a vampire and his mum was impregnated by him, using those exact words, which unsettled me. He said it jokingly, but looking back on it now, it's a tad frightening. He said that I should be worried about him because he's half vampire and he'll be coming for me in the night, then kicked a metal bin over. It's safe to say I thought he was a downright weirdo, but I didn't go out of my way to be mean to him or ignore him. He seemed nice and friendly enough, and he never presented himself as anything but an ordinary guy. My best friend Maisie was a really flirtatious girl, and John took to her really quickly after he'd met her. We used to all go on walks together, and if we found an interesting abandoned place, we'd play manhunt or something. Every time we did this, he would actively try and find Maisie instead of anyone else. She hated this because she was already dating someone and knew that he was trying to get her attention, so she flat out told him that she wasn't interested in him. He soon stopped even talking to her. I guess out of pity I began to be kinder to him. I saw that the tides were turning in our friendship group, and people were beginning to talk badly of him, as Maisie was really popular and well liked in the group, and even though she hadn't told anyone to act differently, the fact that he'd unnerved and upset her set people against him. So I actively tried to be nicer to him, as I knew what it felt like to be an outcast, and I didn't want him to feel left out. This was something I would come to regret. We began talking most nights, because he said he was feeling lonely, or he just wanted to see my cute little face. I never thought too much of his comments, because I just thought they were compliments. At the time I never really thought too much on the things guys said about me, or to me, because I was busy studying for my GCSEs, and those were constantly on my mind. He would offer to help me study, even though he knew nothing about the subjects I was studying. I thought it was sweet, but I always studied better alone, so I'd always say no. He would insist, but I'd again say no. Soon things escalated, and he started turning up outside my school to try and see me. When I would get upset, he would make out he was there to see someone else, but initially he'd always say that he was there to see me. Some of my school friends began getting involved, and they'd say that they were concerned because he seemed like a creeper, and he was too old to be hanging around our school gates. Even our head teacher came out once and lambasted him for loitering around the school's property. It was so humiliating. However, things really came to a head around April. It was my 15th birthday. He was 18, soon to be 19, and I was at home getting ready to go out and meet my friends to go to the cinema. My dad was at work and my mum was out doing the shopping, so it was just me in the house when there was a knock on the door. I knew it couldn't have been my parents because they both had keys, and my brothers were all still at school, so I presumed it was going to be my friends and their parents to come and pick me up and take me to the cinema. So imagine my surprise when I opened the door and John was stood there with a present tucked under his arm. He greeted me happily and pushed the gift into my hands, saying it was for me for my birthday. I was really confused as I hadn't told him it was my birthday, and what's more, I'd never given him my address. While I assumed at the time one of my friends had given him my address, it later came out that no one had actually given him my address. He didn't say much else and then walked off with his hands in his pockets. I then promptly shut and locked the door. The messaging and calling continued. Once again, I had never actually given him my phone number, and no one had admitted to giving it to him. One of my school friends joked that he was stalking me, and maybe she should have brought me a knife for my birthday. We laughed it off, but looking back on it, it was nervous laughter. After a few more incidents here and there, I eventually stopped talking to him. He was messaging me constantly, but I never replied. One day he just stopped messaging me altogether. I was so relieved as I was now able to continue with my life and studies. I gradually started to fall back into my normal routine. With no worries, he'd just turn up. I had a friend, Katie, who had only joined the group about a month before. She was 13 and went to a local school. She was really lovely and she became one of my closest friends, even though I'd only known her for a month. One day she confided with me that John had now begun harassing her and that he messaged her constantly. He surprised her with unannounced visits to her house in the early morning, despite never giving him her address, and she told me that he had tried to assault her in his house after giving her alcohol. I was horrified and felt my blood run cold, but like me, she grew up in a very strict household, and her mum was a very strict Orthodox Christian. She feared her mum wouldn't believe her, so we kept it to ourselves. She had a boyfriend, and she couldn't even tell him as she feared that he would try to hurt John or do something that would get himself in trouble, so I never told anyone. All in all, it was a tough situation. John hated that she was with someone else, and though he turned his affections away from me, I still felt involved and tried hard to keep Katie away from him. One night in October, our group decided to go camping. At this point, there was a consensus to not invite John to any of our group activities, and he had slowly dissolved from our friend group. We were camping a few towns out from ours, in a field next to a Boy Scouts club, so we felt safe enough. It was a really cold night, and we didn't have enough blankets, so me, Katie, and another 2 people shared a tent and huddled together to keep warm when we went to bed. At about 4 a.m. I woke up to go to the toilet. I could hear rustling outside, and presumed it to be a fox or the wind, and headed out to brave the gross weather. I sat down in the bushes to pee, when I heard the unmistakable break of a branch and looked over to where I heard the noise from. It was John. He saw me and I saw him, and I literally couldn't believe he was there. He looked like a serial killer, half shrouded in the bushes, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. After about 5 seconds of staring, he just walked into the other direction, into the tree line. I stumbled back to the tent in shock and didn't breathe until the tent was fully zipped up. I cried quietly for an hour before I fell to sleep again. The next morning I asked if anyone had invited him or if he even knew where we were. It was a closed group chat and none of us told anyone where we were going. Who knows how long he was there? People thought I could have been dreaming, but I wasn't. It was definitely him, as clear as day. I will never ever forget the expressionless look on his face as he turned and walked away, like I didn't even see him. After this incident, he never messaged any of us again, and I never saw him again. It was like he was a ghost who existed in my life for 9 to 10 months. We spoke about him and the fact he was so weird, but we never invited him to hang out with us again. Some of my friends at the time didn't even believe that any of this had happened. It's still something that Katie doesn't even like mentioning to this day. Even just his name being mentioned upsets her. I don't know what happened to him, but I call him my casual stalker because his stalking of me wasn't nearly as severe as Katie. She told me he'd just walk and follow behind her sometimes after the camping incident, but I never saw him again. I joined Reddit just to make this post. It's been a long time since when this happened, so please also excuse any inconsistency, as I'm trying to remember all the details by going over old messages. This took place maybe around the age of 13. Let me set the scene. I was seeing my first serious boyfriend, Sam. Sam was a nerdy kind of guy, and we had met at church. When he had asked me out, I was over the moon, as another girl had talking to him during that time also. I was flattered he had chosen me. In those days I was having a lot of issues at home and had attempted suicide, as well as physically harming myself. My relationship with my parents was terrible and still is, which is probably why I never told them about any of this. Besides my personal problems, I'd say my relationship with Sam was running smoothly, until he came into contact with Alison. I don't recall exactly when or where Sam met Alison, but I believe it was when he was at Air Cadets. It's almost like she just appeared from nowhere. Whenever Sam and I were going through our rough patch, he would talk to Alison about it, and she would console him. It made me really uncomfortable at the time, being a jealous 13-year-old. Our key communication was over Skype, as he lived a good 40 minutes away from me. On average, I'd see him twice a week, once on a Saturday, in which I would catch 2 buses to his home, and the second time being at church on a Sunday. He would often tell me stories about his long conversations with Alison, how she was hilarious and that she didn't like me, even though I had never spoken to her myself. I assume this was due to him mainly speaking to her about our childish arguments. I first came into contact with Alison during another argument with Sam. We were bickering about something unimportant, and a message popped up on my Skype. It was from Alison. I don't recall exactly what the message said, as this was in 2014. I've tried again to access my old Skype account to try and find the old messages, but to no avail. I do though remember her insulting me repeatedly, and saying how I didn't deserve Sam and how I should just die in regards to my suicide attempt. I responded harshly, telling her to fuck off or something along those lines. Was it polite? No, but I was extremely standoffish at this age. Ultimately, my response angered her, and I was bombarded with call after call. I declined every single one, and I reported to Sam what had been going on. He said he had told her to leave me alone, so all was good for a while, and the whole thing hadn't affected me too much. This behaviour was semi-normal for me, as high school relationship dramas were almost an everyday occurrence at my school. Looking back on it, Sam was almost definitely cheating on me, but I was too naive and childishly in love to care. My second incident with Alison was on a summer's afternoon. I was relaxing on Sam's bed after an afternoon of messing around. He had gone to finish a chore in the kitchen and had left his computer open. I decided to check my Facebook and so went to log in. On the screen was an open chat with Alison. Being curious, I scrolled through it. I was greeted with an onslaught of naked images of her. This started a huge fight, as you can imagine. Sam said that she was just a jealous stalker girl. My third interaction with Alison was at my local library. Alison must have been 16, as she was completing some work experiences at the time. I was, and am still, an avid book reader. I was there with my mother and sister when I noticed her at the counter. She stared me down, and it took me aback as I didn't recognize her to begin with. It then clicked, and I was more annoyed than anything. I didn't pick up a book. Instead, I opted to hang around my sister as she checked out some books. Alison's eyes never left me until the time came to leave. As my mum was taking out some books, she made small talk with Alison. I was surprised at how polite and well-mannered she was in comparison to the girl who had messaged me, and I actually began to feel guilty for the way I'd responded to her in the past. Once we were home, I hopped on my phone and wrote a message to her, apologizing for the way I had spoken to her. The message I received back was a totally different tone altogether. She called me a fat bitch, that I had no right to date Sam, and all I brought him was misery. This time her words really did affect me, so I called Sam and begged him to never contact her again. I remember vividly sobbing and crying for hours. This happened a couple more times, each time escalating in severity. She made threats to beat my lights out. My mental health was greatly affected by this. I wasn't afraid of her, but more upset at the things she had said. I never took a single threat seriously, and even to this day I have no idea why Sam stayed in contact with her. I began to avoid the library, and my relationship with Sam continued. One day I got into a large argument with my mother and called Sam, sobbing. He consoled me and told me it was going to be all right. Impulsively, I decided to go for a run, leaving my phone at home. I wanted to be out of the house, so I was gone for maybe an hour or two. When I returned home, I'd had an onslaught of messages from Sam, deeply concerned for my well-being. I apologized and explained the situation. A reminder this entire time that I had not blocked Alison. She messaged me with the usual drivel, and I was so used to her threats at this point it hardly fazed me. The same threat happened again. I'll fucking beat your lights out. Calling her bluff, I replied, "Go on then, you don't even know where I live." Her reply came. It was my address. My heart skipped a beat. All the threats of violence were all too real now, and I remember shaking uncontrollably. I sobbed down the phone to Sam. I begged him to block her and never speak to her again, but he continued to speak to her. I never did. New girls appeared in her place, but none were as invasive as her. We ended the relationship after a year and a bit. In one of the messages I sent to him regarding our breakup, I spoke about Alison and his stalker girls. It's been a long time since then, and Sam and I occasionally speak. I'd say we were on good terms. He's in a band and I'm still studying. At the time I didn't realize the severity of her actions. The fact she had gone onto the computer base at my library and searched for my address didn't cross my mind until many years later. It still sends shivers down my spine. What she would have been actually capable of doing, I'll never know. I truly hope no one finds out. I tried finding her online out of curiosity, but to no avail. If she was capable of that amount of calculation at 16 years of age, I wonder what she's capable of now. I hope this serves as a word of warning to parents to look out for their kids. I met a guy online back in August of last year. We immediately hit it off, but I was reluctant to get in a relationship, as I had been cheated on a few months prior. Having feelings for anyone again scared the shit out of me, frankly, but this guy was so sweet and nice that I just felt like I could completely trust him, and I was willing to risk it for him. Skip to mid-September. We had both admitted feelings for each other a while before this, but he was reluctant to ask me out. I wasn't sure why, but I figured he was just waiting for the right moment, which he was. He let slip that his birthday was coming up, and after thinking about it I felt I had to point out how he's supposedly turning 19, but is still in high school. Then he told me that he isn't 18, but 17, and he's turning 18 in a few days. This pissed me off. I'm 18 and I just don't like being lied to. We'd met in a place that's for 18-plus people, and he pointed out that I had never directly asked him his age, but I just assumed because of where we met he was older. Despite all this, when he turned 18 and asked me out, I said yes. We lasted less than a month. He would start fights every single day over the dumbest shit. If I took over 10 minutes to reply to messages from him, he would get pissed at me and would tell me that I needed to tell him when I was going to be doing anything, so he wouldn't be waiting for my messages. He got mad that I've been in relationships before him, despite none of them turning out good, etc., etc. So because of all of this, I decided to break up with him. I thought maybe in the future he would stop this ridiculous behavior, as this was his first relationship, and he was just inexperienced. I calmly told him multiple times that things needed to change, and once the fights had stopped we would try again. but they never stopped for more than a few days. One time he had lied to me by saying some girl had been flirting with him and asked if he was single or taken, just so I'd confirm our relationship to him. Which I didn't, because we weren't dating anymore. He got real mad. It was obviously a lie, but he insisted it had happened. Only later that evening did he admit it was a lie. Eventually I shut off my Snapchat map because I didn't want him knowing where I lived, and he got really mad that I didn't trust him. One of my best IRL friends messaged me asking why he was requesting to follow her. I checked his Instagram and he had started following everyone who was following me. I told him to unfollow them because he doesn't even know them, and it's kind of weird. He got mad, but he did what I asked. 2 weeks ago I woke up one morning to a message from him telling me we need to talk. He asked me why I've been lying to him, why I've been hiding things behind his back. I asked him what he was talking about, because I have never lied to him, nor hidden anything from him. He said he's been messaging all my friends on Instagram, asking for information about me, who I've dated, what I've been doing, etc. He asked me why I've been FaceTiming people behind his back, and not telling him everything about my past relationships. I don't know if I was more shocked with the fact that he'd done this, or the fact these people were actually giving him info about me. I never did anything behind his back. The only person I had ever FaceTimed had FaceTimed me first, randomly, and only for 30 minutes, just to play 8-ball on iMessage. He even mentioned about talking to people that I haven't talked to in months. He also made alternate accounts, befriending people from my past, and voice chatting with them, playing games with them, all just to get info from them about me once they'd opened up. He even mentioned that my ex had messaged me, which I'd never told anyone, so I have no idea how he found that out. My Snapchat kept logging me out, so I think he had also hacked into my account to read my conversations with people. He found my old Reddit and went back 2 years of comment history to get mad at stuff I've said in my distant past. When I asked him how he found out about my one ex contacting me, he said, "You don't deserve to know," before then proceeding to block me on everything. The day after, he emailed me saying that there's nothing left to say, and we're just acquaintances now. I told him, nah, we aren't even acquaintances anymore. He's just some crazy dude I dated once, and it's his loss in the end, because he caused all of this by playing detective, as he liked to put it. He said he did all of this because he was curious, not that he didn't trust me, and he ended up finding lots of stuff he didn't want to. I guessed he meant my past relationships, because that's all he really ever mentioned. His little tangent went on for quite a while, saying he's my loss and he could have made me happy, blah blah blah. I told him he could never have made me happy. So I'm not sure how many people know what Fetlife is, but basically it's a fetish BDSM social media site. Facebook for those into kink, basically. It was used a lot for hookups, dating, etc. I was primarily into it to sometimes read some short erotica that was posted in the forums, and finding more like-minded friends, but I did eventually branch out and meet some people off of there. Most of them were really cool, others not so much, as they were just a bit boring. All in all, it was pretty okay, but after talking to one guy and meeting up with him for the first time, I got really bad vibes from him and decided to not go any further with it. He just creeped me out for some reason, but he was not ready to give up. Things went quiet for a while, and then 2 weeks later I kept getting harassing messages from blank accounts that I'm assuming were all his, as they were all different variations of the same screen name, but words and letters arranged in a different order. They were pretty harmless messages like, "Why don't you love me? I thought we had something special. Hello? Please talk to me." Things of that nature. Annoying, but not deemed dangerous. Well, one day he shows up at my work. He didn't know that it was where I worked. I did work at McDonald's, so it wasn't that weird, and luckily I work in the back at the drive-thru, so I only saw him out of the corner of my eye. When I went out to the front to grab some cups, I saw him, but I didn't think he recognized me. I had my head shaved. It was trendy at the time, and when I'd originally met him I was wearing a wig. I never told him I had shaved my head. He called out my name though, so I rushed back and told my manager, and he was asked to leave. I didn't see or hear from him for 2 weeks until I got another message from a totally new, unnamed account. This one, though, was much more sinister. I knew it was him. It had to be. When I had only known him online, I had sent him videos and pictures. Stupid, I know. And when he found that I was dating someone new, he got angry and threatened to expose me. Also, he now knew where I went to school, the names of my mother, my sister, where they worked, what stores I shopped at, and where I lived, etc., etc. Luckily, nothing happened. I moved soon after that, and I never heard from him again. But needless to say, I was very spooked, and it scared me away from online dating for good. I made a police report, so maybe that scared him away.